Hello and welcome to BCM241 Media Ethnographies. In this lecture, I'm going to discuss the digital artifact and research report approach for the subject. And I'm going to give you an overview of the assessment criteria and how to prepare your digital artifact and your research report for assessment. So let's start with some broad principles about the digital artifact. There are two approaches to the digital artifact. The first approach is the continuous approach, and subjects like BCM112 and BCM114 are really great examples of this. BCM302, of course, is another great example. And the continuous approach to the digital artifact is where the digital artifact is something that you are working on continuously each week. Another approach to the digital artifact is the summary approach, and I use this in BCM320 and BCM325, where you are doing continuous work, but the DA itself is a kind of summary, a project to present the work. Whereas BCM112 and BCM114, that public presentation is part of the process. Now, this is this is part of the process of public communication. That is the primary goal of the DA, and how you approach the DA is up to you. And while obviously in BCM114, for example, you've got to be presenting and working on that each week. In 241. While I encourage you to make your field notes and your observations weekly and on your journal, that's not a demand and it's not a requirement of the subject. There certainly is encouraged. So you're doing your observation and your autoethnography, and the great way to approach this would be to put your observations and your field notes, even in just rough form, in an audio or video version, a live stream version, for example, or just simply blog notes each week, and then you're obviously working in public. But again, it's not a requirement. So what's important about these two ends of the kind of spectrum of approaches to digital artifacts is they're not exclusive. You can approach the DA in whatever way you like in this subject, whereas other subjects will tell you more explicitly exactly how you are to approach it. I want to draw on another subject that I know a good proportion of you are doing, as a way to compare and contrast to this subject. So we'll start with BCM215 Game Media Industries, which is a subject in the digital and social media major that I teach, that is designed to introduce people who aren't aware of the game media industries or think that they should have that knowledge as part of their degrees. This is especially useful for students in marketing and advertising. And we can approach the DA in this subject in two ways. The first way, of course, is the continuous, where you are doing a weekly live stream. We've had several students graduate from the BCM who are partnered Twitch streamers. And they started out, of course, live streaming as part of their undergraduate DAs in the BCM. So you can do a live stream weekly, daily, via Twitch or via YouTube. Another way to go, of course, is a fortnightly or weekly or daily, however you want to do it, right? Podcast. And this is a kind of proper podcast that has an RSS real simple syndication feed via SoundCloud or YouTube or iTunes or whatever app that you want to use. So this is a great example of the continuous, and it's also a great example of where the DA is not scripted beforehand, right? You're just getting on, maybe talking, going through a conversation you're having with friends, and or you're playing a game in real time, and you're just exploring it, and of course that's kind of observation and autoethnography in real time. This is the point that I make about ethnography as content in the media industries. But when it comes to submitting the DA, you can't submit 20 hours of podcasts. I've had students do that in the past. It's impossible to mark. Similarly, it's not always possible for us to tune in and watch the live stream. And it's certainly not possible for us to watch every live stream or even a full live stream, which might go for an hour, for example. So here is where the summary approach to the DA comes in really handy, because here is where you can make a highlights video. And the highlights video, you would choose the most important moments in the live stream where you are drawing on knowledge gained from the subject and observations on key concepts that you're developing an expertise in from the subject, or your further research and your further reading. So the highlights video, right, is there to signal to the person marking your DA how you have acquired the subject learning outcomes. And so that's really important. And again, if it's a podcast, you can put clips together that do this signaling of learning the subject learning outcomes, acquiring those subject learning outcomes, and addressing the assessment criteria into a relatively short essay that encapsulates everything that you've done in the podcast. So it's quite simple. And this is why we always recommend doing the continuous approach. Whether you're working on Instagram, whether you're building a robot, whether you're engaging in modding or making a game or whatever, that you're actively doing that each week. Because then when it comes to submitting the final DA, it's super easy just to grab all the great highlights, put them in a presentation format, and share it. So let's put that in context of BCM241 media ethnographies. Well, what's the goal here? The goal is that you are researching and developing a expertise in a media niche through observation and autoethnography. You're also, of course, doing background research generally and academic research to help increase the sophistication of your critical analysis. But the goal is to communicate to a public audience. So you can do this via your journal and your blogs. And this is where we're talking about the continuous. So each week you can document your key observations. You can document your key reflections, right? The observation is the kind of raw data, and then the autoethnographic element is thinking about your critical framework and thinking about your personal cultural framework and how that helps you understand those observations in a new way. And you can do that in a continuous way. Blog post, again, a kind of vlog to YouTube is super easy, or just recording audio over slides like I'm doing now. This then makes the DA super easy because you've got the ability to summarize and bring it all together for the final presentation at the end. The important thing to remember is that when you are engaging in the continuous approach to the DA, the focus is on process. So you're trying to get your initial impressions out into the public to start to get feedback in whatever way that is, whether it's from peers or tutors or subject coordinators or the broader public. The summary itself is the final kind of focus on the product, although it's not necessarily focused on the finalized thing. Like, remember, a DA is not something that you can really ever finish. It's just something that evolves and continues in different ways. So remember, when it comes to the DA in this subject, is that you've done all this investigation, you've done this first-hand research into a media niche. Now the job of your digital artifact is to communicate that experience to a public audience who might not be familiar with your niche. When you're putting your final summary together, when you're bringing your digital artifact together, have in mind an audience, an imaginary audience, right? We're not interested in them in the number of views or clicks or whatever you have, right? It's about imagining an audience, and it's about imagining how you can most effectively communicate your experience to a public audience in order to capture their imagination and get them interested in your media niche. Maybe it's something that they have thought about in the past but have never really dived into, or maybe it's something that one of their kids is getting into, or maybe it's something that, because of current conditions, they now have more time on their hand and they might find it interesting and involving in different ways, right? So this is the job of your DA. It is to convince a public audience to check out your media niche. So have that at the front and center of your mind when you're putting your DA together. The important thing is, in this sense then, is to aim for accessibility and inclusion. There's no point in your DA, really, particularly if it's an audio piece or a video piece, to start off the digital artifact by saying this is the digital artifact for BCM241, right? That means nothing to a public audience. What is a digital artifact, right? You have to kind of be in the subject to get a sense of that. What is BCM241, right? These are random numbers and letters. No one's going to have a clue about that, right? So make sure when you are explaining what it is that your DA is about, is that you're putting it in terms that anyone can understand. It's not framed as a digital artifact, because then that's just going to put people off. They're like, what is this person speaking about? I don't know what they're saying. We'll talk more about this in a second, but right, if you're doing a video essay, right, that should also be embedded in a blog, and that's where you can explain, I am a student in media and communication at the University of Wollongong. This is my blog. Here are the 4 blog posts that I did in developing the ideas for this project. Here's my initial pitch, right? So you can put that background material into the kind of contextual post for the DA, but you should be aiming at accessibility and inclusion, and so it's super important not to make assumptions. Don't make assumptions about your audience. Don't make assumptions about their knowledge. Don't make assumptions about their intelligence. Don't make assumptions about their background. Don't make assumptions that they understand anything that you're talking about. It's your job to, as a public communicator, to interest people and provide a bridge, right? Provide a series of stepping stones into your media niche to get them interested and get them involved in what it is that you're offering. Okay, so here are some of the kind of formal elements, and this is where we start to run into some problems. So as part of the Australian Qualification Standard framework for university degrees, there's this notion about what a 200 level student should be expected to do in terms of workload, and then that's filtered through the university, and that's through the faculty, and that's filtered through the school, and so we're left with this really clumsy notion of the 2,000 words, right, as a kind of magical number of what it is that you should be doing, and that really starts to break down when it comes to a digital artifact, because you can really get passionate about your DA and put a huge amount of work into it, and so that doesn't quite then reflect on the 2,000 words. You might end up with 50,000 words. I don't know, or the equivalent, right, in audio, video, or just time spent in a makerspace or talking to people about it. Right, it doesn't make any sense. But the flip side to that, as I was saying, is that we have a limited number of tutors and a limited amount of time and a very restrictive time frame in terms of getting your work assessed, getting it marked, getting it into the system, and getting it published for results. So we're having to spin many plates here and balance many factors out. So we have to make some compromises. So let's talk about how those compromises can work. So say you've been using your blog to do a field journal and you've been writing in each week, and you're going to bring together all your research in a final video audio essay, and then that's going to be embedded in a blog post for the final DA. That's awesome. That's a great way to go. But maybe you've been using Instagram, and maybe you have been taking images of your media niche each week, or maybe you've been using TikTok or whatever, and you've been working on each week in a different way, and you've got annotations and notes and images and screenshots or whatever of your work on that platform. Well, this is where you can then bring that together in your blog as a visual essay. But remember, the adage, what is it? An image is worth 1,000 words. That would be 2 images, right? I don't think that's an effective way to clearly explain all the work that you've been doing. So again, right, you have to compromise here, and you have to think about effective communication, right? So in the DA, you've got public communication, but you also have to think about effective communication. And this is where overly verbose and rambling posts are a real detriment to effective communication. If you're rambling, like if it's just overly verbose and it's not going anywhere, and it's not concise and it's not clear and it's not well edited, then you're going to be marked down because it's not effective communication. So you have to be very clear in your writing. Again, this is where you've got a continuous experience, say in a podcast or a live stream or whatever. That's where the final DA can be brought together as a blog post that would include relevant clips of audio, video. So, these are the two dominant media formats that we see students working in, of course, text as well. And again, this is how does 2,000 words actually mean out? Like 2,000 words, if you just spoke it, like if you talk fast, you could probably get that in under half an hour. If you're talking slow, or you're kind of ad-libbing as you go along and adding to it, right, that could be an hour. So that doesn't work out. Then you've also got the time spent editing, right? So video editing usually does take a little bit of extra time over audio editing, but not always, because sometimes you're really fussy with your audio editing, like I am. I'm not going to do it in this video, but most of my videos I try to cut out my ums and my ahs and my breaths. In this one, I'm just talking to the screen. So it can really vary in terms of that 2,000 words, which would represent a huge amount of research going into that. How does that compare to audio, video, right? So all I'm saying is that you'll probably experience in the BCM degree and different digital artifacts and different subjects, different amounts of time, right? So what we're doing in this subject is we're saying, okay, final video essays can be somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes with a hard 5-minute maximum. Audio pieces, we can say between 5 and 8 minutes with an 8-minute maximum. Now that is a compromise in order to make it possible for the tutors and myself to mark your work and get the feedback and get it into the system. It's a complete compromise. It's not a real number in any sense with regards to the 2,000 words, which I don't think is a real number anyway. But anyway, let's move on. Let's just say that video is 5 minutes hard maximum and audio is 8 minute hard maximum. And I would expect a script. So with the final DA, I would expect you to write out a script before that. So again, how does that 2,000 words fit in there? I don't know. That script can then be put into a blog, and you can then have the description, tags. A lot of people forget descriptions in their YouTube videos, for example. I'll come back to talking about that in a second. All right, then there is another major component to this subject, and that is the research report. This is a huge compromise because it's a 500 words minimum. Now you need to talk to your tutor, because some tutors will be will consider this as a maximum as well. the important thing is that a research report is not an essay. An essay is an argument, whereas a research report is trying to effectively communicate what you have done and provide a summary of your work. So those are two very different things. So a research report is not an essay. A report is a summary. Right? This is a summary of the work you've done. So don't be afraid at any time to save yourself words. Right? You don't need to explain your media niche because it's in your DA and it's in your blog posts. So you can say, this is my media niche. Here are my blog posts, and link to the blog posts and link to the DA. That you don't have to repeat yourself, right? It's already done. You've done that work. We can go and look at that if we're unclear in any way. So that doesn't need to be in the research report. A report should have a cover, and we're not assessing aesthetics here. Some students go all out on covers. Some students it's just a straight up plain black and white text with the relevant details. That's fine. Index page or a contents page is really important. So we should be able to very quickly navigate to what we want to check out in the report. The abstract, the introduction or overview, as I said, should be absolutely minimal. 2 to 3 sentences at most, doing all the linking and all the work, right? That should be super minimal. Findings. Now this is one of the important elements, but again here, this is where you can put your journal notes, or again, you would link, if you've got your journal notes, you can put that on a blog post and you can then link to that. And here you can start to record maybe in dot points the key observations and epiphanies that you have developed, encountered, arrived at. A list of dot points of key observations. Super effective. Here is where we would expect to see updated field maps and lots of screenshots and images of your research that has gone into the observation and the autoethnographic exploration of your field notes. Again, so this does not have to be textual very much, although please, when you include an image, have a description of the image, have a figure number for the image, and put that in the index. That's professional. Any background sources. Now, this is particularly important where you're doing academic research to help inform your understanding and your knowledge about the subject. And in the research report, we would definitely expect a Harvard-style referencing, and that doesn't take up word count, right? So we're not going to count that. Now, the most important section is the analysis, and this is where the bulk of this 500 words should be. And this is where you are drawing on your further academic research, and you have developed an analytical framework for making sense of your observations. Now, again, this is not an essay, so this could be a list or a series of statements about the key observations that you've summarized and how your further research helps you make sense of that. Extra points, right, for pointing out how you were able to include this into your DA, because that would be excellent. I would very much like to see someone say, okay, well, I was doing some research and I found some, economic theory or some legal policy about how to manage intellectual property in podcasts. And I included that in my discussion about true crime podcasts, right? Beautiful, lovely, done, awesome, move on. So research reports are about effective communication, clear communication. They're not an essay. They are a summary, a clear communication of the work that you have done in your DA. So the research report should be uploaded to Moodle as a separate PDF. There will be a cover sheet where you can put the links to your digital artifact, obviously embedded in your blog. And there won't be a rubric for this assessment. There will only be the assessment criteria, which I'm about to speak to, and a grade and a space for comments. Please indicate if you just want the grade only or if you want grade and comments on your assessment cover sheet. I don't think there's much point in doing the rubric at the end of the year because there's too big a break between now and your next subject. All right, so let's quickly go through the assessment criteria. I'm not going to go into detail because I wanted to keep this one short. I just wanted to draw them to your attention to make sure that you have an understanding of what they mean going into the final assessment. All right, 1, the conformity with the learning assessment task instructions. So this is where, this video obviously is really useful, but you've also read the cover sheet and you understand what's required of you and that you've done all that. 2, the quality, consistency, and the professionalism of the DA and the research report, including the spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So we're not going to be editing your work. We're not going to be, going through with a red pen or whatever like that. But if it's not up to scratch, obviously that's a point where you might not do as well. I still see students failing to capitalize the letter I in blog posts. I still see students failing to tag and categorize their blog posts effectively. I still see students failing to put proper descriptions in YouTube videos and podcasts. I still see students putting really bland, BCM241 DA titles on their DAs. Right? That's a really that goes to the 3rd assessment criteria, right, which is a demonstration of high level of digital literacy. Like this is that would be a clear failure if you just put a very generic, bland BCM241 DA title on your video or your podcast or your blog post or whatever. Be creative. You're trying to attract an audience. No one outside the university knows, or even in the subjects, right, knows what BCM means or a DA is. Demonstration of a high level of digital literacy. So this is a really important one if you're just planning your DA as a blog post at the end. Now that's okay. A blog is a wonderful multimedia format, but you should be making the most of the affordances of the web in that instance. So one way to do that would be to read the blog post and upload that to SoundCloud and then embed that in the blog. You'll see this on a lot of kind of journalistic sites where there is a reading of the text because audiences sometimes like that. I certainly know that sometimes I like to just click on the audio link and press play while I'm doing email or whatever. So you've got to think of how you can make your media as approachable to a broader audience as possible. Similarly, you could just talk to camera and just do a vlog of the text that's in your blog post. That would be excellent, and that would be a way to increase the digital literacies of a simple blog post. All right, structure and organization, right? So this applies to the DA, this applies to the research report. It should be clear, it should be organized, it should make the most use of links, right? You don't need to repeat stuff if it's already in your blogs or it's already in the observation journal notes or whatever. This one is pretty straightforward. Evidence of engagement with the subject lectures and resources. So this was apparent in some of the pictures and still some of the blogs, is that still students haven't quite fully understood what autoethnography is and what the purpose is there, and so those resources are there for you to engage with and make sure you have a clear basis. Now, number 6 is a really important one, and probably an evidence that not all of the assessment criteria are equal. So we will be looking for evidence of further supporting academic research as well as background information, drawing on subject relevant concepts as well as kind of popular news as much as academic sources in order to critically analyze your observations. And that's a key process of autoethnography. You're saying, this is my experience. How can I understand that experience through what other people have said. Now, when you're doing research, you might find that people, the research that you find, you might find an academic paper on something that's really relevant to what you're doing, but you actually disagree with it. You actually disagree with their paper, and then you can point to evidence that you've been able to generate via your own observations to show, no, that's completely wrong. Look, I've found this to be entirely different. So you don't always have to find information that supports your argument. You can draw on materials that you can clash with, and that can be really interesting for audiences. So again, right, it's not don't limit yourself to only stuff that agrees with you. All right, I think that is enough. If you have any questions for me, hit me up on Discord, send me an email, and we can arrange to make a consultation time. I'm really keen for students to be able to wrap up this subject by week 10 in order to make sure that you have more time to spend on other subjects and to really free up that end of session. So keen to support you, and the Dropbox for the final assessment will be open at the end of week 10. If you have any questions, I'm keen to answer them. Otherwise, happy researching.